Min Jae always believed that Seoul looked its most beautiful when it was drowning in darkness. It was nearly midnight. The narrow alleys behind Jongno's antique district stretched like veins, disappearing into the shadows. Most tourists would never wander this far after closing, but Min Jae wasn't most tourists. Born in Los Angeles to Korean immigrants, he had returned to Seoul for a photography residency, searching for what he called the haunted heartbeat of heritage. He carried his camera like a protective charm, snapping rusted hinges, faded hanji-covered windows, old grandmothers sweeping worn stone courtyards. But tonight, the lens couldn't capture the silence settling over the streets. It wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. Then, he saw it. At the very end of the alley, where the streetlights didn't reach and the night hung like wet cloth, a faint glow shimmered. A lantern. But not the warm golden kind seen at festivals. This one shimmered with a pale bluish light, cold and still, thin as frost but steady. No flame, no string, no one holding it. It simply floated. Min Jae froze. He blinked. His breath curled in the air like smoke. The summer humidity had vanished. The cold he felt wasn't outside, it was behind his ribs, like someone had opened a window deep inside his chest. He lifted his camera instinctively and zoomed in. No one was holding it. Just air. The lens fogged slightly, not from the outside, but from within the glass. He stepped closer, curiosity pulling against instinct. The lantern moved. It turned the corner at the end of the alley slowly, not bobbing like it should, but gliding, as if it were leading him. He followed, not by choice, but because each step felt remembered, like walking inside a dream he'd already had. His shoes tapped gently against the cobblestones. The echo was softer than it should have been. He turned the corner. Nothing. Just a closed wooden door. A rusted metal knocker shaped like a lion's head. And the air. Cold in a way that didn't make sense. He reached toward the door, just to touch it, just to knock. He hadn't moved. Knock! 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 It wasn't him. The door trembled. The knocker shifted. He stepped back. Silence. Then he saw it. Just at the base of the door frame, the lantern. Now dimmer. Colder. Its light faded like something had drained it. He picked it up without thinking. It was weightless. Empty inside. No candle, no bulb, just folded paper. And then came the smell. Not smoke, not wax. Ash. Burned hair. Old tears. Min Jae's fingers trembled. The light inside the lantern flared. For a heartbeat, he saw a face that wasn't his. A woman, pale, black eyes, mouth open in a silent scream. Then nothing. He let go, but it didn't fall. It hovered there, waiting. That night, Min Jae returned to his hostel, but he told no one what he had seen. Not even when his roommate found him standing in front of the mirror at 3:17 a.m., holding a lighter to his own breath, whispering, "I'm trying to give it fire."
Min Jae didn't remember falling asleep. One moment, he was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The next, he was waking up to a sound that didn't belong in the real world. Knock, knock, knock. 3 steady knocks, echoing down the narrow hallway of the guest house, faint but precise, as if someone knew the exact rhythm that would wake him. He sat up, slowly, his breath misted in the air. The room was cold, too cold. The kind of cold that didn't come from broken windows or busted air conditioning, but from something deeper, more wrong. His roommate was still asleep, headphones on, oblivious. Min Jae looked toward the door. It was closed, locked. But the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time closer. He pulled on a sweatshirt and crept to the peephole, expecting to see nothing. But outside the door, the hallway light flickered, and something was hanging from the knob. It wasn't there before. He opened the door slowly, just a crack. There was no one in the hallway, no footsteps, no creaks, just stillness. And the item hanging on the knob was the lantern. The same cold, bluish glow. Min Jae stared at it, frozen. It pulsed once, as if breathing, then again. He didn't touch it. He simply closed the door again, but the cold stayed. Inside his room, the mirror across from his bed had fogged up from the inside. He approached it cautiously. His own reflection was dull, almost delayed, as if it lagged behind him by half a second. Then letters began to form in the fog. Not carved, not written, just slowly appearing as if whispered onto the glass by invisible breath. Let me in. 3 words. He wiped the mirror clean, but they remained. Let me in. His heart pounded against his ribs. He backed away, hands trembling. And that's when he saw it again. The lantern. Now it wasn't on the doorknob. It was inside the room. Floating. Silent. Flickering. The air went thin. Min Jae collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath, like the room had lost all oxygen. His vision tunneled. Cold wrapped around his spine. Then, just like that, it was gone. The air returned. The mirror cleared. His roommate snored softly, as if nothing had happened. And on the floor by the bed lay the lantern, unlit again, empty, waiting. In the morning, no one mentioned the cold. Min Jae sat in the shared kitchen of the guest house, staring into a bowl of instant ramen he didn't remember making. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. The refrigerator hummed. The silence between appliances stretched awkwardly. His roommate Sam shuffled in, still half asleep, rubbing his arms. Feels like the heat's broken again. Min Jae said nothing. Sam poured himself some cereal, then sat across the table without looking up, the way people do when they're trying not to acknowledge something that kept them up all night. Another guest came in, a girl named Yuna, who slept in the room next door. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion. She pulled her sleeves over her hands. Did anyone else feel freezing last night? Nobody answered. She looked around and added, I had the weirdest dream. I was locked in a room, a paper door I couldn't open, something behind it, breathing. Min Jae finally spoke. There was a lantern outside my door. Yuna's head jerked up. Bluish light, she whispered. No flame. The room fell silent again. Sam chuckled nervously, trying to break the tension. I mean, it's an old house, right? Maybe the electricity's messing with stuff. Old wiring, ghosts. No one laughed. Later that day, Min Jae walked the hallways with his camera. Not to take pictures, just to watch. The rooms felt wrong, somehow smaller than they used to be. The doors seemed heavier, the light dimmer. He passed room 6 and paused. It was supposed to be unoccupied, but the door was slightly open. He peeked inside. Cold. So cold the walls shimmered with frost, though the sun outside was blazing. In the center of the bed lay a girl curled up under 3 blankets, shivering. Her lips were pale. Her breath came out in short, cloudy bursts. He recognized her. She'd arrived 3 days ago, a backpacker from Daegu who kept to herself. The lantern sat on her nightstand, glowing faintly.
No one else seemed to notice. He stepped away quickly, closing the door behind him. His pulse thundered in his ears. Later that night, she checked out. No one saw her leave. She didn't say goodbye. When the owner went to clean the room the next day, she found the bed still made, the blanket stiff with frost, the lamp beside it melted into warped plastic. But no one mentioned it. No one ever does. Instead, the guests started bundling up at night, wearing scarves indoors, hugging their knees to sleep. Some claimed the cold was in their bones. Others started having dreams of fire, dreams of doors that wouldn't open. Min Jae tried to stay awake every night, but the lantern always found someone. Min Jae had never been afraid of silence, but now it followed him like a shadow. 3 nights had passed since the lantern first appeared, and each night the cold grew deeper. It wasn't just temperature anymore. It was something else, something slower, like time itself freezing in layers around him. He tried staying in busy places, cafes, underground bookstores, crowded subway cars. But whenever he returned to the guest house, something waited. The lantern was never gone for long. On the 4th night, he returned late, hoping exhaustion would shield him from whatever haunted the halls. He opened his door and stopped. The room was warm. Too warm. It felt unnatural, like stepping into a sealed greenhouse. The windows fogged over, the floor damp with condensation. And on the bed sat something small and familiar. A wooden matchbox, old, burned along the edges, blackened by time. He approached slowly, his hands trembling. He picked it up gently and opened the lid. Inside were 3 matches, each stick scorched halfway down, as if someone had lit them but never let them finish burning. Then he noticed the tips of his fingers, blue, like frostbite. He hadn't realized how numb he'd become. The room was still warm, yet his body felt like ice. He reached for the matches again, as if pulled by instinct. He didn't know why. Maybe to test them, maybe to offer something. He struck one against the side of the box. A flame bloomed, soft, flickering, brief, and then it vanished. Not because it burned out, but because something pulled it. He felt it. Not wind, not air, but hunger. The match hissed cold in his hand. The burned wood snapped apart in 2. His breath came faster. He struck the 2nd match. This time, the flame held longer, dancing strangely in the room's heavy air. Then, the lantern rose from beneath the bed. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't glowing. It was still and dark, waiting. As the match flickered, the lantern shifted toward him. He backed away, but his hand stayed outstretched, the match burning closer to his skin. The light from the flame bent toward the lantern, as if drawn. It stretched unnaturally, then jumped. The flame detached itself from the match and entered the paper body of the lantern. Min Jae gasped. The warmth in the room vanished instantly. The lantern glowed again, bluish, empty, hungrier than before. The last match dropped from his hand onto the floor. He collapsed beside it, fingers aching, eyes wide. The lantern floated in place for a moment, then gently drifted toward the door. It didn't need him now. It had taken just enough. Not all. Not yet. The next morning, Min Jae woke with a sore throat and a strange numbness in his jaw. He hadn't spoken a word since the lantern left his room the night before.
He wandered downstairs like a sleepwalker and sat in the courtyard where the light of morning barely reached through the stone walls and laundry lines. The landlady was already there, sweeping leaves into a corner. Her bent back moved slowly and rhythmically, like she had been doing this forever. Min Jae watched her for a while before finding the courage to ask, "Can I ask you something?" She didn't look up. "About the lantern?" She stopped sweeping. The silence that followed felt older than the walls. "You saw it then?" Her voice was quiet and cracked, like the brittle broom in her hands. Min Jae nodded slowly. "It's not the first time." She leaned on the broom and looked toward the sky. "Some things return when they're not finished," she said softly, "and some never leave at all." He waited. She continued. "Long ago, before this house was a guest house, it was a private home, the kind that passed down through families. A woman lived here with her mother and little brother. Quiet people. A bit strange, maybe, but kind." There was a fire? Min Jae felt his chest tighten. The kind that doesn't happen by accident. They said it started in the kitchen, but I remember hearing that she had been locked inside, from the outside. She tried to get out. She pounded on the doors, screamed through the paper walls, but no one came in time. Only the little brother survived. He had gone to buy rice. They found her near the door, her hands bloody from trying to claw it open, her mouth burned shut. The landlady's eyes didn't blink. The family never rebuilt the house. They left the city, and no one heard from them again. But the room stayed. People say they still hear knocking. Some say they dream of a girl calling out, asking to be let in. Min Jae's throat burned again. He whispered, "Why a lantern?" Because the only thing they found intact in the ashes was her paper lantern. It didn't burn. Not a corner, not a singe. She made it herself the week before the fire. She wrote her wishes on the inside of the folds. A wish to go home. A wish to be seen. A wish to stay warm. The landlady sighed. Sometimes I wonder if that's what kept it alive, or what cursed it. She looked at Min Jae then. If it ever asks for fire, don't give it yours. Min Jae didn't reply. He just stood there, feeling the cold return to his fingers, even in the sunlight.
The attic door was never meant to be noticed. It sat above the stairwell leading to the rooftop, a low square of faded wood pressed into the ceiling. No handle, no sign, just a small ring of rusted metal. Min Jae had passed it many times without a thought, but after the landlady's story, he couldn't stop looking at it. The idea had planted itself quietly in his mind like a seed of ice. What if the lantern didn't just appear? What if it lived somewhere? That night, when the house fell into its usual unnatural silence and the others tucked themselves into their cold dreams, Min Jae stood in the stairwell, staring up. He brought a broom handle and prodded the metal ring. It gave easily. With a soft groan, the door cracked open and released a breath of freezing air. Dust spiraled down like ash. He climbed up slowly, the wooden ladder creaking under his weight. Every step made him feel like he was leaving something behind. The attic smelled like old paper and burned wood. It was darker than it should have been, even with the flashlight in his hand. As the beam of light swept across the room, he saw shapes. Dozens of paper lanterns, some crushed, some torn, some hanging from the wooden beams like dried skin.
but only one glowed. It hovered in the farthest corner of the attic, blue, cold, watching. Min Jae approached it slowly, careful not to step on the broken ones that littered the floor. As he got closer, he realized something. It wasn't the same lantern. It was smaller, and it wasn't glowing with the same quiet hunger. This one flickered like it was struggling, barely alive. And then he saw the writing. Faint hand-drawn characters on the inner folds of the paper, almost invisible unless the light caught them just right. They weren't prayers, they were names, all Korean. Dozens of them, faint and fading. He reached out without meaning to. His hand hovered just inches from the paper when he heard a sound, a rustling behind him. He turned quickly. Nothing. He turned back. The lantern was gone, but in its place, something else floated gently down. A single piece of paper, burned at the edges. He caught it before it hit the ground. His name was written on it, in his handwriting, but he had never written it. His breath caught in his throat. Behind him, something creaked. The lantern had returned. Only now it was different, its light brighter, its paper darker, and the second glow pulsing behind it. Another lantern rising from the corner, then another and another. Min Jae stepped back too fast and nearly fell through the attic opening. He dropped the paper. It burned in midair before hitting the floor. He climbed down in a panic and slammed the attic door shut. The cold followed him like breath on his neck. That night, he didn't sleep, and neither did the lanterns.
Min Jae began forgetting things. At first, it was small, where he left his phone, what he had eaten for breakfast, the date. But then it grew stranger. He would wake up in the middle of the night and find his hand reaching for the window latch, even though he was sure he had never touched it before. Or he would open the closet and see clothes that weren't his, old, dusty, too small. He stood in the mirror one morning and blinked. The face looking back blinked half a second later, like it had to remember how to follow. Then the dreams began. They weren't his. He knew that instantly. He dreamed of kneeling in a dark hallway, scratching at a locked door. He felt the heat on his back, felt smoke crawling into his lungs, felt fingernails breaking on splintered wood. He woke up gasping, covered in sweat, but the room was cold, always cold. On the fourth night, he dreamed of a window. He was inside a room, but not alone. Someone stood outside, a woman or a girl, face pressed to the paper screen, hands glowing like candles. She whispered something. "Let me carry it. Let me carry the fire. I won't take all of you, just enough." He woke to find his hands covered in soot. His camera no longer worked. The lens was cracked from the inside. And when he opened the file folder on his computer, every photo from the last 3 weeks was gone, replaced by a single image. A door, burned from the inside, no handle. He went downstairs to the courtyard to breathe. The landlady was feeding the birds. She didn't look up. He asked her if she had ever dreamed of someone else's death. She said nothing, but her hands trembled slightly. That night, Min Jae stayed up and wrote down everything he could remember, every dream, every face, every whisper. In the morning, the pages were blank, every word erased. Only one sentence remained, written in the same trembling ink. "She remembers for you now." The boy in room 3 touched it first. His name was Jun So. a quiet traveler from Busan. He had arrived 2 days earlier, polite, soft-spoken, the kind who always returned his key and smiled with his eyes. On the third night, he didn't come down for breakfast. At first, no one noticed, but Min Jae did. He hadn't seen Jun-so since dusk, and in this house, no one disappeared without leaving something behind. So Min Jae knocked on his door. No answer. He pressed his ear against the wood. Silence, but not empty silence. It was a breathing kind of silence, the kind that filled your ears and whispered your name when no one was there. He opened the door slowly. Inside, the curtains were drawn, but the room glowed faintly, a bluish light pulsing from the corner. Jun-so sat on the edge of the bed, barefoot, still, staring at the lantern floating just a few inches from his face. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His eyes were glassy, reflecting the light in perfect stillness, as if the flame had replaced his pupils. He called his name. No response. He took a step forward, and the floor creaked. The lantern turned. It rotated slowly, almost curiously, and then drifted toward the door. Jun-so didn't move. He remained seated, hands resting on his knees, skin pale, breath shallow. The lantern floated past Min Jae, whispering cold against his neck, and disappeared down the hallway. He closed the door behind it. The next morning, the staff said Jun-so had checked out early, paid in cash, didn't say a word. But Min Jae knew the truth. Later, he returned to room 3 alone. No suitcase, no scent, no sign of someone ever having stayed. Only one thing remained. A fingerprint burned into the wall beside the bed. Long, black, like soot soaked into the plaster. He reached out to touch it. And in that moment, he saw a flash. A memory, but not his. Jun-so kneeling beside the lantern, crying without tears, mouthing something again and again. Please don't take all of it. Please leave me something. Then darkness. Min Jae pulled his hand back. His fingertips were black. That night, he slept with gloves on, a scarf around his face, the matchbox hidden in a locked drawer. But he still heard it, moving through the hallway, looking, waiting, not for anyone, for someone warm enough, someone soft enough to touch. The city never truly slept, but Min Jae did. And when he woke, he was not in his room. He stood on a street he didn't recognize, cobbled, narrow, lined with wooden hanok houses too perfect to be real. The moon above was full, but no light touched the ground. Only blue, only cold. He looked down. The lantern hovered beside his feet, its glow brighter now, casting long shadows that moved even when he didn't. Ahead, a shape waited at the end of the street, motionless, hair covering its face, hands folded as if in prayer. He turned to run, but the alley behind him had vanished. The walls breathed, paper screens whispered his name. He opened his mouth to scream, but only fog came out. Then a voice behind him, not loud, but ancient, like wind blowing through ash. You do not belong here. He turned. A man stood there, or something that had once been a man. His robes were ceremonial, tattered and stained with old fire. A long scar split his chin, and the space where his left eye should have been glowed faintly. He held a bell carved from bone, and it rang even though it never moved. Min Jae stepped back. The lantern floated higher, as if afraid. The man raised his hand slowly. She comes from the east, where gates stay closed, where ashes sleep in jars too small for memory. He took a step forward, the ground beneath him cracking like frozen earth. You lit her again. You fed what should have faded. You made her remember her death. Min Jae tried to speak, but his throat burned with smoke. He dropped to his knees. The man knelt with him, placing the bell beside his ear. 3 things you must know, he said, his voice now inside Min Jae's skull, not his ears. 1. She is not alone. Others wait in the cold, each with their own hunger. 2. She does not want your fire. She wants your absence, the warmth that leaves behind a space she can wear like skin. 3. Once you remember her death, you are no longer the witness. You are the candle. The man pressed his hand against Min Jae's forehead, and the street shattered. He woke in his bed, sweating, shivering, gasping for breath. His door was wide open, and the bell was on his pillow. The hallway lights stopped working on the 10th night. One by one, they dimmed and flickered out, until only the emergency bulb at the far end remained, buzzing faintly, casting long, distorted shadows along the wallpaper. Min Jae stood outside his room, his back to the wall, listening. Not for footsteps, for the sound the lantern made when it moved. It wasn't a sound anyone else could hear, not really. It was the faint hush of paper shifting in still air, the crackle of memory too dry to burn clean, the echo of a breath caught between 2 bodies, neither living. He turned the key in his door, but the knob wouldn't move. Locked. He tried again, then again. The key turned, but the door remained shut, as if the wood itself had decided no longer to open. He tried the door to room 6, then room 5, then the laundry door at the end of the hall. Every one locked. The hallway had become a corridor of refusal. He ran back down the steps, but the front entrance was bolted from the inside, even though no one ever locked it, not since the fire escape had been deemed unsafe. Trapped. He stood in the middle of the entryway, surrounded by locked doors and still silence, and then it appeared, the lantern, descending the staircase, slowly, softly, as if it had been watching from above, waiting for him to understand. It hovered at the center of the room, glowing softly, casting blue light that touched nothing and no one. He stepped back, but the lantern turned. It faced him. Not just the paper, but something within it. A presence. He felt it stretch across the floor like smoke, reaching for the soles of his feet, the tips of his fingers, the softest place in his chest where his memories lived. He whispered, without realizing, "I don't want to forget." The lantern pulsed. Its glow deepened. And then the knocking began, not from the doors, from the walls. The walls were knocking, softly, steadily, like fists wrapped in cloth. 1 knock, 2, 3. Min Jae looked around. Each room locked. Each room calling. The knocks became faster, then louder. Dozens, hundreds, all in rhythm. Then they stopped. He turned. The lantern was gone, and in its place stood the first door.
wooden, burnt at the edges, familiar. He had seen it in dreams, in mirrors, in photographs that had never been taken. It didn't belong in the guest house, but now it was here, and it was opening.
The door opened without sound. There were no hinges, no creak, no breath of air escaping from the other side. Only darkness and the feeling that someone had been waiting behind it for far too long. Min Jae stood still. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from recognition. He had never seen this room before, and yet he knew what it smelled like, what the walls would feel like, what waited inside. He stepped through. The door closed behind him, not with a slam, but like a sigh. The room was bare, charred wooden floor, walls made of singed hanji screens, no furniture, no windows, just a single paper lantern hanging in the center, glowing faintly like the last ember in a bed of ash. He moved closer. With each step, the room grew colder, but not with winter cold. This was the chill of absence, the frost left behind when something living had been removed. He stood beneath the lantern, looking up into its center. The glow flickered, then deepened, then changed. It was no longer just light. It was an eye, watching him from within. And then a face emerged, drawn not in ink, but in flickering heat. A woman. Her face formed slowly inside the flame, shifting like smoke over paper. She was young. Her hair clung to her cheeks, burned at the ends. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She reached forward, not the real her, but the shape within the light, hands pressed against the inside of the lantern as if trying to remember how to reach. Min Jae fell to his knees. The room spun. The paper walls trembled. Images crashed into his head like water bursting through a dam. A girl, locked inside a burning room, begging to be let out, screaming through smoke, banging on a door that would never open. A mother, crying on the other side, refusing to listen. A brother, running too late, holding a bag of rice and a key he would never use. He felt it all. The fear, the betrayal, the moment the air was sucked out of her lungs, leaving behind nothing but silence. And then, a wish. Not for revenge, not for anger. A single desperate wish whispered into paper before death arrived. Let me be warm again. The flame grew. Her face filled the lantern, no longer flickering, but staring directly at him, not asking, begging. Let me carry the fire. Let me remember what it felt like. Min Jae raised his hand without thinking. His fingers reached the paper surface, but before he touched it, a single tear fell from his eye and landed on the lantern. The glow cracked. The face twisted, not in rage, in sorrow. The room shattered. He was outside again, on his knees, in the hallway of the guest house. The lantern rested on the floor beside him, dark, silent, empty. But in his chest, something still burned. The lantern would not stay dark, even after everything, even after the girl's face vanished, after the tear cracked the glow. After the room dissolved and dropped him back into the hallway, it still pulsed, dim but alive, like a coal buried under ash. Min Jae wrapped it in a towel, stuffed it inside his backpack, and left the guest house before dawn. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. Not at the landlady, not at the other rooms, not even at his own one. He walked until the sky turned gray, until the city opened its mouth and swallowed the quiet. Then he boarded a bus heading east. No destination in mind, just distance. He sat at the back, windows fogged, head pressed to the glass, and tried not to feel the cold slowly leaking out of the bag at his feet. But it followed him, not just in temperature, in weight. Memories that weren't his kept slipping between thoughts, flickers of firelight on floorboards, the smell of burning hair, the sound of paper splitting as it curled and crumpled inward. He began to see her reflection in things that shouldn't reflect. The window of a convenience store, a puddle under the bus stop, the polished surface of his phone screen when it went dark. Always the same. Not accusing, not angry, just watching, just waiting. He made it to a small fishing village by the sea, a place with no lanterns, no guest houses, no old paper walls. He rented a room above a shuttered market, tossed the backpack on the floor, and tried to sleep. That night he dreamed of a fire that didn't burn. It filled a room with light but no heat. The walls caught flame but never turned to ash. His hands reached out and passed through it like mist. In the center stood the lantern, opened like a flower, petals of paper unfurling slowly. And inside, a mirror. Not glass, but fire shaped into memory. He looked in and saw himself, older, colder, mouth moving silently as he held the lantern before another locked door, another boy on the other side, just like him, offering warmth, not knowing what would be taken. When he woke, his breath misted in the air. The lantern was glowing again, not brighter, not louder, but clearer, as if it had learned how to breathe without him. He reached for it, not to destroy it, but to ask a question. Before he could form the words, the flame inside pulsed once, and a whisper echoed in his head. You cannot put out what was never yours to light. Min Jae stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. Time became slippery. Days folded into each other like burned pages stuck together. He no longer knew what hour it was, only that the lantern was always near. It no longer hid in corners, no longer waited in silence. It floated openly now, beside him, above him, sometimes hovering at eye level when he sat still too long. Its glow had changed, not brighter, but deeper, a glow that felt heavier than light should feel, as if it carried something inside it, pressing outward. He tried once to destroy it. He took it down to the rocky shoreline just before dawn, placed it between two stones, and struck a match. The flame flickered, then vanished. He struck another. It fizzled before it touched the paper. The third match cracked in his hand, splitting down the middle. He screamed into the waves, but they didn't care. The lantern floated calmly back into his arms, warm now, just slightly. That warmth terrified him more than the cold ever had, because it was familiar, because it came from him. That night, he found himself seated on the floor of the rented room, knees drawn to his chest, the matchbox in one hand, the lantern in front of him. It waited, its paper walls pulsing like lungs. Min Jae whispered into the darkness, "Do you want my fire, or do you want what it leaves behind?" The lantern flickered in response. He lit a match, held it out. The flame danced nervously on the tip, like it too could feel the hunger in the air. He moved it closer to the lantern, inch by inch, and as he did, his body began to grow colder. The skin on his hands turned pale, veins darkening beneath the surface. His breath slowed, not because of fear, but because something was pulling it from him, gently, steadily. The flame tilted forward, drawn. Min Jae blinked. He saw her again, the girl in the flame. But this time she wasn't screaming. She was weeping, softly, as if remembering something too painful to name. He looked into her face and saw fragments of his own memory reflected there. His childhood bed, the warmth of his mother's lap, the first time he cried and someone held him without asking why. All of it flickered inside the flame and then began to fade. "No," he whispered. "This is mine." He pulled the match back, snuffed it out between his fingers. The cold rushed in. The lantern pulsed violently, as if starving, as if betrayed. But he held it in his hands and said nothing. Not tonight. Not yet. If it wanted his warmth, it would have to take it without permission. And maybe, just maybe, that would make it weaker. The lantern changed after that night. It no longer floated beside Min Jae. It began drifting ahead, waiting at doorways, pausing at corners, hovering just out of reach, as if searching for something else, or someone else. He followed it, not because he wanted to, but because it didn't let him rest. If he stayed still, it would return, hover inches from his face, pull the heat from his fingertips, make him dream of the fire again. But when he followed, when he walked behind it, it left him alone. So he walked. Through markets closed for the season, through alleyways that twisted into themselves, through temple courtyards where statues cracked under frost. It led him to people. First, a woman on a park bench, blanket over her knees, hands tucked beneath her arms. The lantern hovered beside her for a moment, then flickered and floated away. Not her. Next, a child crouched beside a fountain, crying softly. The lantern circled once, but didn't stop. Too small, too warm. Then an old man lighting incense in a doorway. The lantern pulsed briefly, but passed by. Min Jae began to understand. It wasn't just looking for cold. It was looking for someone empty. Someone whose flame was flickering, barely alive, easier to take. One night, it paused outside a convenience store. Inside, a teenager stood behind the counter, headphones on, eyes vacant. A burn scar ran down his left arm. The lantern pressed itself against the glass. Min Jae rushed forward, grabbed it. The paper was hot, not from within, but from memory. The moment his fingers closed around it, he saw the boy's story. A room filled with smoke, a kitchen fire no one came to stop, a scream that never escaped, an apology never spoken. He let go of the lantern. It dropped to the sidewalk, but didn't fall. It hovered there, flickering, confused. Min Jae whispered to it, even though he didn't know why. Not him. Not again. The lantern pulsed, then dimmed. It rose and turned, floating away down the street, looking, always looking. Min Jae didn't follow. That night, he locked himself in a storage shed behind the market, wrapped himself in blankets, and slept without dreams. In the morning, there was frost on the inside of the window, and written across the glass, in a crooked finger, were 3 words. You stopped me. Min Jae stopped walking, stopped wandering, stopped running. But the lantern did not. Even when he hid, even when he locked doors, even when he told himself it was over, it still found him. Always. It no longer needed to glow. It had learned how to follow in silence. And now, something else had changed. It no longer drifted freely. It led him. Every night, closer to a place he did not recognize, but had seen before in dreams, in flashes, in the shaking reflection of cold water. The village sat beneath a low ridge, quiet, fog-wrapped, a few rooftops hunched like old shoulders beneath pine trees. Min Jae had no memory of coming here, but his feet stopped on the worn dirt road like they had returned. The lantern hovered beside him, not glowing, just present. It pulsed once, then turned, toward a narrow path between 2 stone fences lined with bamboo and silence. He followed. The houses grew older the deeper he went, walls sagging, roofs cracked, wooden gates leaning into themselves. Then he saw it, the door. It stood at the end of a long garden, half buried in ivy, its frame scorched, edges blackened and warped. It was not connected to any house. It stood alone, a door with no wall. The lantern floated toward it and stopped just inches from the surface. The wood pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Min Jae stepped forward and placed his hand on the door. Cold, but not empty. It hummed, not with sound, but with memory. He saw flashes behind his eyelids, a girl screaming, a latch that would not move, a flame creeping up paper walls, a silence that fell too fast. He whispered into the door, his voice barely holding shape. I'm not the one who locked you in, but I know what it's like to scream into a silence that pretends not to hear. The door trembled beneath his palm. The lantern brightened, just once, then dimmed again. And then the knob moved. For the first time, the door creaked open. Inside was not a room. It was a corridor of doors. Hundreds, thousands, all identical. Each one shut, each one pulsing slightly like a heart waiting to be opened. The lantern floated into the darkness. Min Jae stood at the threshold. He could turn back, or he could follow. One last time. He stepped through. The corridor behind the door felt nothing like the world he had known. It had no sound, no scent, no movement, only the soft glow of the lantern ahead, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe on their own. Each door he passed looked the same, scorched edges, paper panels singed at the corners, knobs rusted over with time that didn't exist here. Min Jae didn't try to open them. He knew what lived behind them. Grief, longing, rooms soaked in sorrow, lives that had ended before the scream could finish. And then he reached the one door that felt different. At the very end of the corridor,
barely visible in the lantern's glow, stood a black wooden door with no burn marks. It was clean, untouched, almost new. The lantern hovered beside it, waiting. Min Jae reached for the knob. It turned without resistance. The door opened to reveal a narrow staircase, wooden, steep, leading up. He climbed. Each step groaned beneath his weight, not loudly, but with something like warning. The air grew heavier, thicker, like he was breathing through cloth. At the top, the attic waited. Not the same attic from the guest house, but it remembered that place. Its walls were the same warped beams, its floor the same dust, the same forgotten breath. And in the center of the attic stood the shadow. It wasn't a person, and it wasn't nothing. It had the shape of grief, the height of memory, and the silence of someone who had waited too long. It turned to him slowly, not a face, but a mask of smoke, and behind it, the faintest outline of her, the girl. Not screaming, not crying, just watching. The lantern floated between them, then dimmed, then dropped to the floor. It shattered, not loudly, but like paper folding into itself. The shadow stepped forward, and Min Jae understood. She had never needed warmth. She had never wanted revenge. She had never asked for fire. She had only asked to be seen, to not vanish inside a screen. He knelt on the floor, reached into his coat, and pulled out the last thing he had never burned, the photo of his family. Old, creased, almost forgotten. He held it out, offering it with both hands. "This is mine," he whispered, "and I give it to you." The shadow paused, then reached forward, slowly, gently. It didn't take the photo, it touched it. And in that moment, Min Jae felt something leave him. Not pain, not memory, but weight. Like someone had finally accepted the part of him that could never be spoken. The attic filled with warmth, not heat, but presence. The shadow faded. The girl turned, walked into the far wall, and vanished. And when he looked down, the photo had curled into ash, but the warmth remained. Min Jae stood alone in the attic. For the first time, truly alone. And he was not afraid. Min Jae descended the attic stairs slowly, step by step, each footfall echoing less than the last. By the time he reached the bottom, his body felt different. Not lighter, but rearranged, as if some piece of him had been lifted out and something older had been placed in its place. The corridor of doors was gone. In its place stood a narrow hallway of bare wooden walls, flickering with candlelight, though he saw no candles. He walked forward, guided by instinct now, not fear. There were no sounds, only breath, his and something else, moving just behind him, never touching, never gone. At the end of the hallway, a doorway opened on its own. Beyond it, an empty room, small, bare, silent. A low table sat in the center. Upon it, a single white bowl of water,
and beside it, a folded square of hanji paper, unburned, unwritten. Min Jae understood. This was the place she had waited to return to. Not the attic, not the house, not even the fire, but the moment before it all. He knelt before the table, hands trembling, but not from cold. He unfolded the hanji paper slowly, its surface untouched, waiting. He reached into his chest, not physically, but from that place where voices echo and memories ache. He whispered a name, her name. He did not know how he knew it, but the paper did. The ink bled into the page without a brush, delicate, trembling lines curling into a name too old for the living to speak. Then the water stirred. It began to rise, not spill, but rise, forming a shape, a figure, soft as mist, but full. The girl stood in the center of the room, no longer a shadow, no longer bound in paper, no longer burned. She looked at him, not with sorrow, but with recognition. She stepped forward and placed her hand over his heart. For a moment, his body went still. No breath, no thought, only warmth, like the final glow of a fire before dawn. Then she stepped back and dissolved into the air. No scream, no wind, no fear, just silence. Real silence. The kind that comes when a question is finally answered. The bowl of water stilled, the paper folded itself again, and the doorway behind him opened. He stepped through, and the world was waiting. The sun was rising when Min Jae stepped outside. For the first time in weeks, the light felt real, not cold, not borrowed, not something that might vanish the moment he blinked. The air still held its chill, but it was the natural kind, the kind that touched the skin without trying to enter the bones. He stood at the edge of the village, watching mist pull back from the hills, watching the rooftops warm with gold. He waited for the lantern, but it did not come. He waited for the knock, the flicker, the whisper behind the mirror. Nothing. Only birds and the wind through pine. He walked slowly back into the main road, passing houses that had once looked haunted, but now only looked tired. The same cracked windows, the same moss-lined fences, but the weight was gone. Something had been lifted, not erased, but returned. He reached the bus stop by the edge of town. An old man sat there, nodding quietly, a bag of rice at his feet. Min Jae sat beside him. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say, and everything had already been said. The bus arrived just as the sun broke fully over the trees. Min Jae boarded, found a seat at the back, and set his bag on the floor. He reached inside, expecting to find the broken remains of the lantern, or nothing at all. But there was something. A single, curled piece of hanji paper, soft, warm to the touch. He unfolded it slowly. Inside, only one word. Home. He stared at it for a long time. Then, let it go. The wind took it as the bus pulled away, carrying it east, toward the fire that no longer burned. Weeks passed. Min Jae returned to the city, to crowded subways, to glass buildings, to the noise of people always looking down at something glowing in their palms. But the lantern never returned. Not in alleys, not in dreams, not in mirrors fogged with breath. He began to wonder if it had ever truly been real, or if brief had given shape to something only he could see. But some things still lingered. When he held a match, he felt the warmth leave his fingers faster than it should. When he stood too long in front of a locked door, he felt something watching, waiting to be remembered. And sometimes, when he passed strangers in the street, he saw faces go pale, hands tremble, eyes flick briefly toward shadows that weren't there. He never asked, but he always noticed. The final ember still lived inside him, not as flame, but as echo, a reminder that there are stories that do not want to be forgotten, only held, only honored. He took photographs again, but now his camera captured things that weren't always visible. The shape of cold air in the corner of a frame, the faint glow above someone's shoulder, a face in the window that had no reflection. He didn't delete them. He saved each one, printed them, taped them to his wall. Each photo a doorway, each image a kind of light. He thought about writing everything down, turning the story into something he could control, something he could give away. But he didn't. Not yet. Some stories want to be lived before they are told, and some lights, once borrowed, never return. The city moved on. It always does. Lights changed, buildings rose, people walked faster, talked louder, forgot easier. But some nights, when the moon vanished completely and the wind carried the scent of ash instead of rain, Min Jae felt it, that old quiet. The breath between footsteps, the pause between thoughts, the invisible ripple that moves through a room when something once broken becomes whole again. He no longer feared it. He lit candles now, not to ward off, but to remember. He kept one in every room, not for her, but for himself, for the warmth that had been taken and then returned differently. He didn't wait for the lantern anymore, but he did listen, not to the knocking or the paper rustle or the voice behind the mirror. He listened to stories. Others began to come to him, not for answers, but for understanding. A girl who dreamed of being locked in a house made of glass. A boy who saw his breath turn blue every time he passed an old well. A stranger who remembered a fire from a lifetime she never lived. Min Jae never questioned them. He simply listened, offered them tea, and asked, "Did it leave you cold, or did it leave you empty?" They never knew how to answer, but their eyes always softened, and that was enough. He began placing lanterns around the city, paper ones, handmade, unlit, hung gently in places no one looked anymore, under bridges, in quiet stairwells, in the corner of forgotten temples. He never lit them. That wasn't their purpose. They weren't warnings, and they weren't beacons. They were invitations for those who were searching, not for fire, but for the memory of being warm. Some passed by without noticing, but others stopped and looked. And when they did, they whispered the same words, "I see you." And the paper trembled softly, as if something inside had been waiting to hear it for a very, very long time.